Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talents Reads. Today's video is my March wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. So from our most current graphic, March was the last subgenre to read for the monster section, which was neo-monster. And as a reminder, the horror challenge, I'll read books and watch some movies that fit into the subcategory as part of the challenge. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't sure what exactly a neo monster was. So I was poking around the internet and I found a horror blog, and it said the neo monster category is home to all of these strange, creative, and downright weird new monsters that don't fit into any of the other standard monster genres. Yeah, so let's just get into all the good stuff. So for this category, I read a total of 5 books. First is The Runes by Scott Smith. This is about a group of friends who go in search of some Mayan runes deep in the Mexican jungle and experience something horrific. I really enjoyed this book. The monster in this setting is very unique and creates a very intense, isolated atmosphere. Now, I will say, I watched the movie before I read the book, and there are some parts that I prefer in the movie, but I do think the book does the isolation and paranoia better. Now, also, when I was taking recommendations for this subgenre, I ended up putting a post on Reddit, and this particular book got recommended. I can see why it was recommended, because I would consider this like a monster-y book, though the monster isn't like traditional terms. Now, I myself actually put the movie in the animals and nature subgenre, and I think that is more fitting in that section. I definitely think it's more of a nature horror, but I could see how you could convince someone to do either or. Next is Devolution by Max Brooks. An eruption of Mount Rainier threatens the survival of a commune, but they've come to learn that the eruption is the least of their worries. So this was enjoyable. It was written in a mixed media format with interviews and newspaper clippings and journal entries, which I think was a great way to tell the story. Because of course, being Sasquatch, there's gonna be skeptics and stuff. So it was kind of like interviews and people's interpretation of the found journal entries, which was kind of, again, a cool way to tell a story. And with that, obviously it flips kind of from past to present, and the past being the journal entries during the time of the eruption, and the massacre, and then the present kind of being all the scientists and journalists who like came across everything after it happened and are currently kind of debating the truth of the matter, and of course speculation about how everything went down and all of that. Now I thought we'll say the battle of sorts near the end was a little bit much. I think it was a little too over the top for my liking and what I had hoped for the ending. But still, with that said, not a bad book. And if you are at all wondering, yes, this is actually a book about Sasquatch, and yes, Sasquatch does make an appearance in the book. Next was Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. We follow Faye and Felix as they decide to stay in like a remote family cabin to celebrate their engagement. But there's something out in the surrounding woods that's begging to come in. So this had some pretty creepy parts, and I think the overall premise of the monster was unique and scary, which is why I'm giving the rating a little bit higher than a 3. But I will say this dragged a little bit, and like most of the conversations were just the epitome of someone having the information but not wanting to say anything for like 200 pages, which is just really extremely annoying. And I think it was meant to sort of, I don't know, like drag the suspense on a little bit. And if that's the case, then the final reveal should knock my socks off. And when we found out the real truth, it just didn't live up to the hype, which was a little disappointing. Next, I read The Night Will Find Us by Matthew Lyons. In this book, 4 friends decide to go on a summer camping trip in the Pine Barrens. But one of the group members is there for other reasons. And the group kind of finds themselves trying to survive each other in the forest. So I have to admit, when this got recommended on that Reddit post, I was surprised because I had originally bought this book thinking it was a vampire novel. But what was tormenting them in the forest was way more creepier. It was kind of zombie-ish, kind of vampire-ish, kind of hallucinating acid trip, kind of something else. It was very hard to describe. And even with the creepy creature, I just found myself a little bored by everything that was going on. So, next and lastly, the last book that I read for this subcategory was Halloween Themed by C.B. Hunt. In this town, the residents are hunted by a creature they refer to as Halloween. When the sun goes down, Halloween emerges to collect the offerings the residents leave on their porch. And each resident barricades themselves inside, and the rule is you do not, under any circumstances, make eye contact with Halloween. But, of course, All Hallows Eve, there's a little something special in the air, and things get a little crazy. I loved this. I thought it was so cool to have Halloween be a character itself and a creature of the night, no less. I mean, come on, that's kind of perfect. And, of course, it had that small town feel, which was just a perfect setting for this novella. There was a little bit of lore and a little bit of, I'll say, sacrificial cult happenings. It was just chef's kiss. I would say if you are planning to read this book, I think it really would be fun to read this during Halloween season. I could see how that would really maybe even add some enjoyment to the book, reading it in the season of its intention, right? Okay, so that's it for the books. Let's talk about the 4 movies that I watched. First is The Descent, which is about a group of friends who decide to go on a caving expedition. And they end up getting trapped in the cave, but they soon learn there is something far darker in there with them. Okay, first off, the creature in this movie is the best part of the movie. And let me tell you, they are sure terrifying. Now, as far as the group of friends in the movie, I wouldn't believe that they would be friends in any sort of real setting. I think they were just 2 different personalities. It just didn't feel authentic to me. And quite honestly, I didn't really care for any of them. They made some really stupid decisions considering they were supposed to be like expert mountain climbers. Yeah. And of course, this had a lot of blood and gore, so if you're into that, then maybe you would like this movie. Next is Sea Fever, which is about a PhD student that is traveling with a sailing crew. As part of her studies, when something goes wrong and they end up trapped at sea with a growing parasite in their water supply. Now, don't get mad at me for including a parasite as a monster, but in this case, it does fit, I promise. And I don't want to spoil anything, so if you're at all intrigued, just go watch the movie. And I will say I actually enjoyed this more than I thought I would. I thought at first the kind of opening of the trip was a little boring, but things kind of kick off with a bang fairly quickly. And I love that isolation feel, but with the sea fever, it brings a whole other level of panic. And of course, as that spreads, it adds just this nice, wonderful touch of tension in the movie that we all enjoy. Next is Nightbreed, which is about a man who is drawn to a dark place called Meridian, where a group of monsters are hiding from humanity. Oh, I tried. I really, really tried. I am just not, I guess, a B-rated horror movie type of person. Because a lot of these great classics are just not my cup of tea. This movie is by the same person that brought you Hellraiser. So if you can at all imagine what type of movie this is. I will say this is definitely not as gory and dark as Hellraiser was, but this is just as freaking weird. These monsters were more friendly rather than like rip your face off scary, which added a nice comedy element, but you couldn't pay me any amount of money to watch this again. We'll just leave it at that. And the last movie is Smile. This is about a psychiatrist at a hospital witnesses a bizarre incident involving a patient who believes a smiling demon was after her. And now the psychiatrist is convinced that she is being stalked by the same entity. So I saved this for last because this was my favorite of the bunch. This was just fantastic. It was really freaking creepy. And quite honestly, the smiling just made it creepy. Like, who knew a smile could be terrifying? And I am still including it as a monster movie because at one point, the creature / entity does end up showing itself. And I think you would all agree that there is nowhere else to categorize this monster. All right. Now for my recommendations. So I struggled a little bit with this because although I read quite a bit of monster fiction, I found like most of the books that came to my mind when I was thinking monsters, I could easily slot in one of the other categories, which if that's the case, it didn't seem like a neo monster to me. I'd pick up a book and I'd be like, ooh, this would be a good one, but this is more cosmic horror, which is a category we haven't touched on, so I'm saving it. Or, ooh, what about this one, but that's clearly a giant monster. Stuff like that. But I think I managed to finally decide on 4 to recommend. First is Below by Laurel Hightower. So the very first sentence of the book says, "How far would you go to help a stranger?" And that pretty much sums up the book. We follow Addie, who is traveling by herself on a lonely highway behind a semi-truck that, suddenly plummets off the cliff. And Addie struggles with the decision whether to put herself first or help the stranger. So, this was really enjoyable. I think Addie made some dumb decisions, but it did make for a more interesting read. And of course, the fact that they're off the cliff in this deep, dark crevice was a really good setting and backdrop for this type of monster. And this is a novella. So of course the creature wasted no time making itself known. And all in all, it was enough to convince me, 1, to never drive in the dark again, and never help a stranger who plummets off the cliff. And those are the things I've learned from this book. Next is Dark Harvest by Norman Partridge. This is Halloween in 1963. They call him the October Boy, or Ol' Hacksaw Face, or Sawtooth Jack. Whatever the name, everybody in this small Midwestern town knows who he is. He rises from the cornfields every Halloween with a butcher knife in his hand and makes his way toward town, where groups of boys eagerly await their chance to confront the legendary Nightmare. The October Boy is the prize in an annual rite of life and death. You know, of course I couldn't resist adding another Halloween book to this horror challenge list. This novella was great, and I'm so happy to hear that it's going to be made into a movie. And the creature of this book totally reminds me of like a Sam from Trick or Treat, or Pumpkinhead, or even maybe like Jack Skellington when he's in his Pumpkin Town form from Nightmare Before Christmas, like that type of creature. And of course, this rite of passage is very interesting. And again, if you're looking for a good novella for Halloween, I would definitely recommend reading this during that season. 'Cause, yeah. Next is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This follows the lives of 4 men haunted by a deadly event that took place when they were young. I'm recommending this as Neo Monster because I think this is a really good mix of monster or entity creature type thing and psychological horror. I think this is more about guilt that happened years ago, and maybe even you could argue that guilt has summoned a creature, right, who is almost a sub-character and, you know, a darkness that traps each of these men and drives them mad. This book has, I think, been a lot of hit or miss, but it's a really good book by Stephen Graham Jones, so definitely would recommend. Next is The Road of Bones by Christopher Golden. So first, let me say that this book is based on a real place and real event, which I think just adds to the trauma and feeling in the overall book. There is a stretch of road known as the Road of Bones. And in the winter, this 1,200-mile stretch of road has temperatures that drop like 60 degrees below zero. So it's extremely cold weather. And so this book follows Felix, or Ted, as he is called, nicknamed in the book, and his friend as they kind of shoot a documentary film. But, of course, they get more than they bargained for and kind of begins a night for their survival. So, I have to say, I freaking loved this book. I thought the weave of the history was such a good move, and reading this at night during the cold season is honestly the only way people should be reading this book. I think the entire book is kind of meant to be set over like one night during that extremely cold winter season. And the author did such a great job describing the cold in such a way that you could like feel it in your bones. And of course the darkness, and then just the monsters in the dark. Oh, it was just great. And at first I thought they were just animals, but oh, just you wait. All right, that's it for book recommendations. Let's go through my 4 movie recommendations. This was a lot easier to think of. So obviously I had a lot more come to my mind, but I've managed to narrow it down to 4. First is Tremors. This is about people in a small, isolated town that band together to defend themselves against underground creatures. Yep, I added Tremors. Don't hate. Some of the acting is cringy, I will admit. But, I have to tell you, I love it and all of its quirkiness. Being swallowed in the hot, dry desert sounds horrible enough, but to also be eaten alive by this giant groundworm thing makes everything just seem worse, Next is Prey. This is about Naru, a skilled warrior who fights to protect her tribe against the predators that landed on Earth. I'm going to admit it here. I think I like this movie better than the original Predator movie. Oh! Did I just say that out loud? I did, didn't I? Yep. I'm sticking with it. I absolutely love this. I loved the indigenous representation in this, and of course, I loved that the warrior was this kick-ass woman. I thought the fight scenes were very true to Predator's style, but also fit one for the time period this is supposed to be set in. And I like the fact that it shows a lot of culture about using, what's in nature and the things around you and working with nature as opposed to against it. I liked all of that kind of commentary and scenes within the movie. And there was just really great imagery. And again, kind of like the first movie, you don't see Predator right away, so that kind of just tense feeling of you don't know what they're fighting was really good built up in the movie. Next is Antlers. This is about a teacher and her top brother who decide to help a young boy in this isolated Oregon town. And this boy is harboring a very dark, dangerous secret. This movie is based on the lore of the Wendigo, which was fantastic. I don't think you see that very much in movies. At first I thought it was a zombie movie, but oh no. This creature is definitely not something you want to mess with. Now, with that said, there is some gory scenes, and there are some scenes of killing animals as well as killing children. So beware of that if you're sensitive to that. And the last recommendation I have is The Manor. After suffering a stroke, Judith moves into a nursing home where she becomes convinced there is an entity there killing the residents. This movie was different and totally not what I was expecting. I mean, I guess you could probably put it in the witch category, but I think that might be a stretch. Um, yeah, the scenes were really creepy. And of course, with it being, the older residents, some of them obviously not able to help themselves, it gave it more of that panic feeling. Um, and I think the creature itself that was haunting the residents was very cool and not a demon that I've seen in movies before, which was really cool. And really, I would recommend watching this movie just to see the end. Um, because it'll make you clap your hands and jump for joy, which is what we like to see in horror movies. All right, we have made it to the end. That's all I have for this video. Drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite Neo monster horror book and or movies are. And even beyond that, just let me know what your favorite creature feature stuff is. I love monsters. So yeah, let me know what your favorite is. That is it for the monster section. So stay tuned for April, which will be the first subgenre in the killer section. And we're tackling everyone's favorites, slashers. I'm so excited. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.